Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. I am Caleb, and today I am going to be reviewing the Star Wars Jedi Academy Trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson. Now, I have not actually reviewed a full series or trilogy or whatever on this channel before. Typically, I just stick with individual single books, even if they are part of a series. Such as the Star Wars X-Wing series. I reviewed the first book, Rogue Squadron, a couple months ago, and other ones like that. I usually review individual books, but in this case, and the case of the video that I am going to be recording directly after this, I am reviewing a whole series in its entirety, mainly because I read the whole series, and I want to just kind of give my thoughts on each book and the series as a whole. This may be something I do in the future as well, depending on how I feel like doing it. But anyways, today I'm going to talk about the Jedi Academy trilogy, which I read at this point a couple of weeks ago. And the reason I have not gotten a review out sooner is because I've been quite sick. I got sick for a few days. I got really sick for one day, and then it kind of wore off over a couple days, and then I just ended up with this cough for like 2 weeks. Which is what happens to me when I get sick. I usually end up with a cough, and I could not talk for more than a couple of sentences without coughing a lot. So that is why this is such a delayed review, and I do apologize for the lack of videos for the last week or two. But I'm feeling better now. So I read these books a couple of weeks ago, very quickly in the span of about 2.5 days. And this was actually a reread for me because these were some of the first Legends or EU books that I ever read. The first one that I read was the novelization of The Force Unleashed. In terms of just the pure, only in the books EU, this was basically my first EU experience. I read these back in high school many times. So this is kind of an interesting review for me because I've read these books many times before, but it had been several years since I last read them. So do keep that in mind as I'm talking about these books. These are books that I know pretty well and have read many times, but it had been a while and I wanted to refresh my memory. So in terms of the timeline, these take place, I think 2 years after the Thrawn trilogy. In terms of the novels, these are actually, I think, the direct follow-up to the Thrawn trilogy. I think there are some comics that take place in between. And this trilogy, as you would probably expect, based on the title, is a large chunk of it is about Luke starting his Jedi Academy. Of course, there are other plots going on with Han Solo and Lando and Mon Mothma and Admiral Akbar, who both actually get pretty substantial roles in this trilogy. But the kind of main plot of it really is Luke starting his Jedi Academy, especially with one of his students named Kip Duron, who has quite a big arc throughout this trilogy. So first I'll talk about each book individually and then talk about the trilogy as a whole. So the first book is called Jedi Search. Again, as the title would imply, in this book is when Luke begins searching for Jedi to bring to his academy and begin training. Alongside this, Han Solo and Chewbacca also head to Kessel and end up involved in some shenanigans there where they meet Kip Duron, who is one of the big central characters in this trilogy. And then you have Luke venturing across the galaxy to a few different planets in order to recruit new people to his Jedi Academy. You have Leia, who at this point, is Han Solo's wife, and they have had 2 children, Jason and Jaina Solo. And she's kind of trying to juggle being a mother and also her duties to the New Republic because she is very involved in that politically and everything. And then you also have Lando Calrissian, who does come into the book at some point. And overall, Jedi Search, I think, is a really great beginning to this trilogy. My kind of thoughts on the trilogy in general is that Jedi Search starts off really high, and then the second book, Dark Apprentice, is a little lower, and then Champions of the Force is a little lower. It's a trilogy that I think generally gets worse with each book, but I think Jedi Search is like a fantastic beginning. It's probably one of my favorite EU novels that I have read thus far, which granted isn't a ton, but out of the ones I have read, it is one of my favorites, and I loved every second of reading this book. I love all the various plots. Luke going to find people to join his Jedi Academy is really interesting. The characters he meets there are really interesting. Han and Chewie on Kessel is a lot of fun, and them meeting Kip and them being involved with the spice mines and stuff like that. They end up getting captured and they end up working in the spice mines of Kessel. That stuff's a lot of fun. The stuff with Leia is really interesting. And then as well at the end of the book, which isn't really, I don't think, too much of a spoiler because it's a very prominent part of all three books. But towards the end, near Kessel, there is the Maelstrom, which is a collection of black holes. And some of the characters go into the Maelstrom and discover the Maw installation, which is an old Imperial facility that has basically been cut off from the galaxy since before A New Hope. So since before the Death Star was destroyed and all that stuff, they don't even know that that stuff has happened. So they get involved and all that stuff. So it's just a lot of really fun plot lines all coming together in some really interesting ways, and it's a great start to the trilogy. It has a lot of interesting setups and things like that. And then there's book 2, Dark Apprentice, which continues a lot of the things from book 1. Luke's Jedi Academy is now established. He has students that he is training. You have Kip Duron, who is kind of the main, I guess, trainee character. He's one of the most central characters to this trilogy, who is doing really well, but he kind of feels like he should be doing more. And at the same time, there is this dark man who, Ganterus, one of the trainees that was found in book 1, he had visions of this dark man, and at first believed Luke was this dark man. He turned out not to be, but this dark man then starts appearing at the temple, or the academy, on Yavin 4. And so all of the trainees and Luke have to deal with that and kind of figure out kind of what's going on, and it leads to some things happening with the trainees, and ultimately Kip Duron becomes involved with this dark man, who is a very, at this point, at the point of when these books were written, not an established character, but now is a very well-established character. I'm not going to spoil who it is because I think it's kind of fun. But they get involved with that. You have Han and Lando, who are kind of fighting over the Millennium Falcon. And then there is Admiral Akbar, who has quite a prominent role in this book. He has an experience at the beginning of the book that is not very good and kind of loses his high standing amongst the New Republic and everything, and he is ashamed, and he decides to step down as a high-ranking member of the New Republic. And so Leia has to kind of work with that and all this stuff. I think that this book is a little bit of a step down from book 1. I do really enjoy the interactions that Kip Duron has with the Dark Man. I think that stuff is absolutely fascinating. I love Kip's arc throughout these books, and I think that his arc in this book is really interesting. And I also enjoyed the stuff with Akbar, the stuff with the Imperials from the Maw installation under Admiral Dala, who I think is a great villain as well. Another good entry into this trilogy, in my opinion. Not as great as book 1, but still a decent entry into the trilogy. And then there is book 3, Champions of the Force. So in this one, Luke, for reasons that are given in the second book, which I'm not going to really get into, he is kind of out of commission, not able to help his students fight against this dark man, so they have to kind of handle that. Mon Mothma has become ill for no apparent reason, and is basically dying as one of the highest ranking members of the New Republic. You know, that's kind of a big deal. So there's that going on, and Leia is especially involved in that as well. And this one, I don't really feel like I have a ton to say about it, because to me it is the least memorable of the three. And it also, in my opinion, is the weakest of the three. Not that it's a bad book by any means. I would still say, like, it's a decent book, but it is definitely the weakest of the three, in my opinion, and isn't quite as exciting or as memorable as especially book 1, but also book 2. But as a whole for this trilogy, I think that this is kind of an underrated trilogy in some ways. Of course, as I said, I think each book is weaker than the last, so averaged out, I wouldn't say this reaches the heights of, say, the Darth Bane trilogy, or even individual books like Darth Plagueis, for example. But I think it is kind of an underrated trilogy. I don't hear it talked about all that much. In fact, a lot of the times when I have heard it talked about, it has been in a kind of negative way, which kind of makes me a little bit sad because, yes, I do enjoy this trilogy, but also it's very near and dear to my heart because it was one of the first EU experience that I had. But I think it is a really enjoyable trilogy. I really enjoy Kip Duron's arc throughout the trilogy. He has some very interesting development that at times I do feel is a little bit rushed, particularly in book 3. I think the stuff that happens with his character is quite rushed in book 3. I will say that. But I think that his arc in general, the concept of it, and most of the execution of it is done really well, and I really enjoy it. He's one of my favorite EU characters just from this trilogy. I haven't really read much else that he was in that I can think of, at least. But I really enjoy him in this trilogy. As I said, with book 1, but also with all 3 books, I enjoy the various different side plots that all the characters are involved in. Again, I do think they are at their highest in book 1, but I think that all 3 have some very interesting side plots. As far as some negatives with this trilogy, because I do think there are certainly some, as I said earlier, I do think that certain parts of the books, particularly book 2 and book 3, are not as great. I don't love them a whole lot. There's a side plot with Jason and Jaina, I believe in book 2, where they get lost, that I wasn't really that into. Book 3, most of the stuff going on that didn't involve Kip Duron and the Jedi Academy I wasn't as much into. But overall, I do really love this trilogy, and I think it is well worth a read. If I were to give a rating to each of these books and the trilogy as a whole, I would probably give Jedi Search a 9, maybe a 9.5. I really, really love Jedi Search. Book 2, Dark Apprentice, I'd probably give like an 8. And Champions of the Force I would give around a 7. So they kind of all steadily decline. A 7 for me is still a good score, so I still think the last book is good. It's just not great like Jedi Search or even Dark Apprentice. As a whole, this trilogy I would give an 8, maybe an 8.5 if I'm feeling a little more generous. Again, fantastic beginning, really pretty good middle, and just a decent, good ending. So even though it does decline over time, I do think that each book is good and has a lot of really interesting stuff going on, and I would recommend the trilogy overall. So that is pretty much all I've got for you for this video. Let me know down in the comments if you have read this trilogy, what you think of it. Do you agree with me that each book is a bit worse than the last, or do you think that maybe the 3rd book is the best one, or whatever? What do you think of it in terms of that and the trilogy in general? Let me know in the comments. And that is pretty much all I got for you for this video, so thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.